And we are live. Hello and welcome everybody to the Wide World of Warhammer. With me today, we've got the beautiful ginger man himself, Kirby. How you doing?
Good, mate. How you going, Sam?
It's a long time no see. It's only been a couple of weeks, but I already miss you, buddy. I already miss you.
That's fair. It's the ginger, isn't
it? So like that. That's a term I haven't heard before, and well, now really? I know. I've never heard the ginger tinge before. So.
The ginger was pretty Aussie, but there we go.
Who knows?
New French.
There we go. Learn something new every day. And I'm sure we'll learn some other new things along the way. So Kirby's return to the podcast, not to talk about mental health and well-being, but maybe it'll come up. Maybe a bit more of I would say not serious, but like a bit more fun topic. How about that? Let's go with that. So, but Kirby, how have you been anyways?
Yeah, pretty good, man. It was obviously we're talking about ANZ TC, or at least it's not public knowledge. I don't know. It's spoiler alert if you didn't know. The beginning of the year, we were ramping up, and it's been pretty busy. So it's been nice to have a little bit of a cool down. But we're doing, got some ideas and some stuff that's happening with Team New South Wales, which we'll talk about today. So it's not exactly a quiet and down, but it has been nice. You know, saw Sam yourself at Capital Clash, had several entertaining games throughout the weekend, and nice to just chill for a little bit and get all prepped for our new meta. That's going to be lovely and sisters filled, I think.
Absolutely. You can't call me a bandwagon meta chaser when I was already playing sisters before the codex, right? That's fine, right?
No comment.
No comment.
I jump armies all the time. I obviously like playing armies for about 3 months and then swapping around just to keep it fresh for myself. And my sisters have probably not ever actually seen the light of day, but there is evidence, photo proof that they existed at the beginning of the pandemic. But whether or not they get play, I don't like playing stuff that's so far above everything else that it's going to be boring for the game. But we'll see what the points are. If the points are 15% higher than what they are at the moment, I think they'll be fine. But wait and see. Don't want to do any doomsday things.
That's it. We won't do any doomsday like we're calling out today on like saying the meta's going to be terrible, everything's bad, but we'll see what happens. But yes, as Kirby alluded to, we'll be talking about, I guess, the New South Wales review and recap of the ANZ Team Championship. So talk about, I guess, a bit of the pre-process, the event itself, and then post-process, how it's all been going. So a bit of alluded to, obviously it's still busy even after the event only occurred just over a month ago. Like generally people take a bit of a break, but not in this day and age. Just over a month ago, we're back at it again. So, but for people who aren't aware, so Kirby, do you mind introducing yourself and, like, I guess, how you're affiliated with Team New South Wales?
Sure. My name's Kirby, in case you haven't figured that out yet. So this past year, I was the captain of Team New South Wales. Every year, Australia has a Teams Championship where you invite all the states to bring a team. Host state normally brings 2 teams, whatever like Victoria this year was Victoria and then the Mercs team. And New Zealand's historically sent a couple of teams across. They sent 2 teams across, I think, this year. I don't know if it was the first year they've done a couple of teams, but back in, I think the second year we ran it, New Zealand came across and they've been pretty consistent since then. And so New South Wales was doing something a little different this year. We had a captain, which wasn't playing. And I don't know if that's been done at ETC, WTC ever before, but definitely not done at ATC. And so that was, I guess, the role that I've been filling the last 9 months or so.
Very cool, very cool. So did you go into being a captain wanting to be this non-playing captain role, or is it decided sort of as a team selection?
It was something that Benny Way had identified for last year before the captaincy was put out. And in the charter, I guess, that New South Wales put forward, it was identified that the captain for this year that we've just had was going to be non-playing. And that was something that New South Wales was aiming to do just to help a little bit make the process a little bit easier. And I'm going to skip ahead to some of your questions that you sent me before, but what we found on the weekend with the non-playing captain, and I think the judges there on the day, Mike from WA, Josh Diffie from Victoria, and our own Ben from New South Wales, all said that having that extra, or the captain not being involved in a game was really helpful, because if there was anything that came up, they didn't have to worry about distracting me from any of my games that I was playing. Was just able to go, hey, what do we need from a captaincy perspective while the other 8 games were going on. So that was our plan going in. And I think from that perspective, it probably worked pretty well. And so the plan going into next year, I think Greg has put out the application for this coming year as well. And we're doing the non-playing captain again.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, good to hear that. Obviously, it worked so well that you're going to do it again this year, and that makes perfect sense, having that person, I guess, to report to, and you're able to, I guess, oversee the whole operation and not get distracted with the baubles or the 40K game, because obviously it can get quite intense, and the focus and preparations are a lot. So I know, obviously, being captain for ACT 3 years ago now, like having to play and captain at the same time, it's a lot, and then even with support stuff, it can be quite a handful. So. And I'm sure you still even found like, oh my god, we don't have enough hands, or people that juggle everything, even, or maybe not.
Yeah, we had enough hands.
We had enough hands.
We had enough hands. We definitely took, I think, the most support staff than anybody else. So we had myself and then 3 other coaches along, and our initial plan had been some of those other coaches were going to be quite hands-on to help players with some of our horde armies, like just stacking dice and getting rid of models and stuff like that. But halfway through, it's a bit of a gray area from the rules perspective. And so we were just asked, no more any touching on the table. Can take models that are already dead off the table, but like stacking dice and things like that. Technically, it's a bit of a time saver. So we're just like, yeah, we can't do that. So we definitely had a plethora of hands available, which was good. But not having to play and manage that was a lot easier.
More than fair. So, we'll get into that as we get along. But so I guess obviously, Kirby. So this is to my mistake. Apologies. So you sort of took a break from 40K for a bit, but this wasn't your first trip at the ANZ TC. So how was it? Like, was it your first year back at the ANZ TC? Like technically, in quite a while, or
So the way that some of our team selection is gone historically, and this is one of the big things that we're changing for this year, is there's a team of 16 that gets selected normally around October, November, maybe a little bit later, and then that team gets pared down to the 8 that are going normally around February, and those are the 8 along with a couple of coaches that end up going to the tournament. So I've not been, I think the year before COVID was probably the last year that I'd attended as a player, and I was part of the playing 16 the year before that we just had, and then there was 2 years in 8th, 2 years in 5th, 2 years in 6th. So there's about 6 ANZ TCs that I was involved with as a player before, and then peripherally with a couple, most notably the year before last. So this was a very different experience. I've never been captain before, and I've never been while not playing. But it was a very good learning experience, I think, from a very different direction to what I'm personally used to.
Yeah, very cool. And I'm sure we'll uncover that a bit more. So I guess you mentioned there having, I guess, a bit of a playing 16. So what was, I guess, the idea behind that? So you had sort of, I guess, a squad of 16 that you sort of narrowed down. Was it like through an application process, or you identified these 16 players? Like, how did that occur, essentially?
Yeah. So what happened for this last season that we just had? Application process goes out. I think we probably put it up in October, November of last year. And I think we got, don't quote me on this, but I feel like it was 30, maybe 40 applicants that applied. And we sent out a series of questions. And we had 2 main focuses with building the team for the past season. And that was sportsmanship, conduct, and then player skill. And I think one of the things that I had said earlier as part of this process is I'd rather take a group of human beings that everybody really enjoys playing against. And I think in New South Wales, we're quite lucky in that we have a lot of players that are really a pleasure to play against and also really good. But I think flipping a little bit in terms of our priorities of just making sure that we had a good group of people, and then we went backwards from there. So one of the main things that we're looking at with the application process was how you answered some of the questions. We've all had, nobody's ever played a perfect game of 40K. We've all made errors before. Some of those questions are around how did you handle those errors, and looking at those responses there. And then clearing out from that perspective was then what are your results? Again, I think we have a luxury in New South Wales where we do have quite a few very high caliber players. And then, okay, we've screened out people that maybe from a conduct perspective we're mindful of. And then we're looking at taking the majority of the group as some of the top players in New South Wales, and then maybe some people that were a little bit more from like I'm going to say development project, but not to say development project because that's not a really nice way to refer to people. But sort of like, oh yeah, this is maybe a bit of a speculation, or we'll see how we go in the fires of developing the team and see what comes out of it.
That makes complete sense to me. Like, you have to develop players. Like, if they don't get exposed to this like caliber of style of play, how else are they going to develop? I'm intrigued there. So you said how there's no perfect game of 40K, and you ask questions around such. Are you able to like divulge like what sort of questions you would ask? Because that's a very interesting approach, and I've never heard of that sort of style of questioning happening.
So off the top of my head, I'm not going to be able to remember the exact question. So if anybody goes, oh, that's not the exact question.
How dare you, Kirby? You don't remember everything? How dare you?
I will respond with an upset emoji. And I'll clarify as well. I'm not going to reveal anybody's particular answers there. But I'll give an example as though I was answering it. But some of the questions would have been around like, have you ever had an altercation or a negative interaction in Warhammer before? How did you manage it? What was the outcome? Same thing if you have gotten a pretty major rule wrong, and maybe you recognized it during the game or after the game, and how did you reconcile that or acknowledge it? An example I always use in this is, was Pantheon this year? No, Pantheon was last year. So at Pantheon, on stream round 4 of last year, I got my Ghost Kill stats inverted and said it was toughness 12, wounds 9, which everybody who plays Tau knows that is not what the Ghost Kill stats are. And I recognized that the next turn. I was just like, oh, I've given you the completely wrong information here. I'm going to remove the model, and if my opponent was comfortable with that, we'll go from there. And that was an error that I had made. Obviously, I'd given the wrong information. The Ghost Kill had survived whatever had been shot at. It's like, okay, that's my fault. I'm going to remove this, and then we'll go from there. And so our questions were really looking at how people manage that. Like, again, there's a very big difference to somebody actively going out and trying to cheat or make up rules or angle shoot or play by intent a little bit weirdly, compared to we've all made those mistakes and they will continue to happen. Warhammer is a game with, I don't know how many rules there are, but there's probably 1,000 plus different rules interactions, not even including all the individual codexes. So we're not going to be able to play a perfect game of Warhammer. Add in a tournament setting, for example, round 6, you've played Warhammer now for 18 hours, you're tired. Many people go out the first night and are maybe a little hungover or jet lagged or something. And it's how we respond to that. Or even if there's somebody else across the table from you that is annoying you or making you not have a good time, how have you responded to that? How have you managed that? And that's where a lot of those questions were aimed around. And that's one of our big components of this year's team and New South Wales process in general, is looking at how we can help not just players or as individuals, but the community and TOs as well.
Yeah, sweet. That's a really cool, insightful, I guess, way of doing things. And I assume, obviously, in your answers, like, look, obviously, no one's perfect. Like, we've all made mistakes and stuff like that. So you're
Yeah.
willing to, I'm sure, as part of the process, like, you would still maybe include players and say, look, I made a mistake here. I didn't realize it till after the event, and I did this. Like, maybe they did I guess, the grade A option, but they're still a grade B, and they're willing to admit they've made mistakes, and they're human beings. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
so that's cool to see. And so, as part of these evaluations, so was it just yourself that was evaluating the players and selected the 16, or was there a council of players or people? Sorry, I should say.
Council of people is I was debating how inappropriate my joke should be there, but I'm just going to skip right through it. So Tim Wallace was our head coach that was voted on as well. So he and I had the majority of the input. Ben Way, when he was rep, was involved in that process as well. And then Greg, I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name, Greg, because I don't think I've actually ever heard it said out loud. So I'll just go and go with Greg M. He was part of that process once he became the rep. I'll stress as well, both Ben and Greg were not wanting to have a significant hand in the team selection. But I think just having that extra set of eyes, and both those guys are pretty level-headed and straight shooters, gentle straight shooters. They're not just going to be harsh at throwing out options. So those were the main three that we're looking across the applications and fine-tuning who we took.
Yeah, very cool. So, and like obviously you selected quite a big squad, and you still had coaches and stuff on the side. So, I guess so. From there, so what was the process after you selected the 16 up until I guess selecting the 8 players and the coaches? What was that process like? Was there a series of boot camps, or was it a trial by fire, survivor style TV show auditions? Like, what was going on?
I've now got 2 really great ideas. We're going to do boot camps, and we're going to do Survivor. And if you get voted off, you're never seen from again. So
There we go.
thank you, Sam. It wasn't really a formal process. Conscious again, life. Warhammer is obviously important for all of us. It's our hobby, but it often does come secondary to life, like holidays or kids or partners, families, stuff like that. So the time that we had, again, I feel like we picked the team in November from memory, up until after Uprising. So it would have been about February that we were kind of narrowing it down to the 8. We had a couple of not necessarily training days, but just like big practice days where a bunch of people would just all join up and throw down armies and stuff like that. We'd have a weekly conversation on Discord, maybe do some TTSing, whether it was watching a certain interaction or having a full game between some of the players. So there wasn't a formal process around it other than the weekly catch-ups, but there was a lot of conversation and practice, even if it was not organized in the team setting. And we have spreadsheets and spreadsheets and spreadsheets and spreadsheets of data. And if somebody was more interested in the spreadsheets than myself, they probably had a lot of fun. I know Tim Sunderland really enjoyed. I shouldn't say that he really enjoyed it. It seemed like he really enjoyed. Tim, correct us if I'm incorrect there. But there was quite a lot of data and stuff that he was pulling out from other teams' events and things. So it was a big mix of broad data analysis and more specific actual gameplay stuff.
Yeah, sure. So, and then I guess what was the selecting the 8? So, how did you guys sort of select these players? Obviously, it's in February. You still probably have like another data slate before the event. So, how did you finalize those 8 players? Like, was it simply the armies they played, or was it something else they offered?
So I rolled D20, and then we just went, what was that? Absolutely, Tim. Data is life, and I want more data from you. In terms of selecting it, some trying to start or figuring out where I start with this. Some experienced players that have like Worlds experience, for example, were probably a lot easier to select and had a lot more flexibility in some of the armies that they were playing. So I think we might have talked about on the last podcast about how there are sometimes army experts or one army individuals that really only play a singular army or a couple of armies. And they're a little bit easier in terms of, do we need Deathwatch, for example? I use Deathwatch because I don't think there's a Deathwatch expert in, like, I shouldn't say expert, but solo play only in New South Wales that I'm aware of. I'm sure there probably is.
Oh, Scotty D49 of Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network is coming after you, Kirby. I mean, come on, buddy.
He plays things other than Deathwatch, doesn't he?
Well, mate, he's a Deathwatch through and through. Oh, so he's a custom chapter boy, but I digress.
Yeah,
That's
custom chapter. Yeah. There we go. Look, Scotty, please don't put me on stream next time, and I won't throw out the shade. That's the easiest way to put it. No, like, shout out to Scotty. He's an awesome bloke, and his stream system is really cool. Continuing my Deathwatch example, I'm going to get atted a lot about this now. Thank you, Sam. If that was the only army that one was playing, and Deathwatch right now is obviously not seemingly in the strongest of positions, then it would probably be, okay, like that's kind of an easy sort of quote-unquote knockout. And even my term knockout there, we'll talk about some of the big changes that we're doing for this year, and that's a big component of it. If there were armies that were doing really, really well, obviously players that played those armies or were skilled in those armies had a lot more chance or space in that 16 moving into the 8. But I think the majority of it was we were picking players that we felt had really good results in that time period. Or, I mean, particularly this last season was the first season of 10th edition. So while we might have had like some people doing really great March last year in events, that was literally a completely different edition. So it was a lot of moving parts and more recent tournament results and game results. And I'll use Jordan McGregor as an example here, who with his Chaos Knights and Sisters has obviously done super well in 10th edition. And I think he won 2 GTs so far, don't quote me, but he's been doing really, really well there. And so that consistently positive result was like, oh, okay, that's kind of what we're looking for. And his sisters got the nerf bat in that time frame, which they clearly didn't. Then it would have been, okay, well, is Jordan a player that we feel comfortable that could swap onto another army? And he's got experience in Chaos Knights, Thousand Suns, other armies as well. So there was a lot of different factors. And as long as there were no conduct issues, we were always looking at what are the armies that we're aiming roughly for. 10th edition is making that a little bit harder than years past. And then also, I think, who's the best player that we think is going to be there and fit amongst the team. Though I don't really think this came up at all because the group that we got together was all super chill and got along pretty well, which was great.
Yeah, that's all you can ask for, right? And it's very hard when you select down to those like last 8 or so players. Like, there's so many very good players who are almost all there. It's just like it's really, really hard. So, but that's very cool to hear. And so you mentioned there, obviously, that world-class experience. Obviously, Brody Middleton and Alex Inglisos at this most recent World Team Championships were there as part of the Alex as a coach and Brody as a player. So what did they bring to the squad as a whole? Was there something that you noticed maybe they did differently or had experience on that maybe wasn't considered prior?
I don't think there was anything necessarily specifically different from that World's experience than what they would be bringing. I mean, both Brody and Alex are very good at 40K. We've seen their consistent results. Brody seems to have been retreating to old world lately. Brody, come on, man. He needed a bit of a break from all the high end competitive stuff. So I think in general, what they were able to bring is a lot of knowledge around Warhammer, particularly when doing some practice games. And I know Alex is obviously super keen on Warhammer in the I just got completely derailed by that comment from Matthew. Sorry. I have avoided fantasy. I can't get into it. Otherwise, I will go down a rabbit hole. But Alex is obviously very keen on Warhammer broadly and is pretty big and interactive in the 40K community in New South Wales anyway. So a lot of that knowledge Alex is around talking about in most spaces. So I think from the world's particular dynamic there, while there was actually, I'm going to walk back what I said. When we were doing a lot of prep, part of our prep shifted a little bit, and we were looking at the layouts and maps and tables a lot more and trying to target tables that we were wanting to avoid for certain matchups or certain armies, and tables that we wanted for our certain matchups. And that was something that Birdie said that they were doing, particularly with Eric. So I think the year Birdie wasn't on the year before, I think he was still in England at that point. But that was something that he said was, hey, this is something that we're doing more for the world stage or the 8 teams perspective. And that was really good. But I think it was also just more their general 40K knowledge and experience that bled through there.
Yeah, sure. And obviously those have been maybe two of the most experienced 40K players, because unfortunately Chris Wright, the Terminator himself, wasn't part of the squad this year. So I'm sure having that, I guess, level of experience at the top end was great too, and to mentor a bunch of younger players. Because outside of those two, I don't think there was many other players who maybe had attended the ANZ TC before. Maybe one experience prior. I'm trying to rattle through my head.
I think what we noticed is, and this is also with players like Chris, we're taking a little bit of a break. He was obviously quite exhausted after 2 years of WTC in a row. But I think we identified after the fact, the only player that had played in an 8-person teams event before had been Birdie. So even like Alex had not played in 8-person teams before. Obviously, lots of experience in Warhammer. He's played over in the WTC as a coach, but not as a player. And everybody else, I think, had lots of 5-person teams experience. Again, we could be wrong there, but that was kind of particularly the vibe that we were talking about afterwards. You go, Sam. I see you unmuting.
Right, I was surprised. I was just going through my head. I was like, yeah, that's right. I was surprised. Like someone that experience, like someone who's been around the scene so long and haven't played in a 8-man team. So I guess, what did you guys do to prepare for that? So was there, and I do know a little bit behind the scenes, there was like an 8v8 internal scrim, I know, with another state, but was there some other 8v8 scrims done, or was there, I guess, practice days of 8v8s to get a feel and sensation for it all?
Yeah. So this is, I think, some of our big takeaways. So particularly our reflection on, oh, wow, Birdie is actually the only person who's done an 8v8 before. Everybody else has tons of 5v5 experience. And I think particularly some self-reflections on myself on how we were captaining and leading the team before. Obviously, from our conversation before, I've played in a few ATCs, and so there was a lot of assumed knowledge that I think for myself that is applicable-ish to 5-person teams, but very much more applicable or important in an 8-team environment, 8-person team environment. So what our practice was, other than that FV8 scrim that we had with ACT, thank you very much, Rowan and the lads there. That was a really great experience. We didn't have any APA practices. We had a couple 5v5 team stuff that we were preparing for. And then we did a lot of practice days, which was more focused around data. So I'm playing Army List A. How does it go against Army List B, C, D, E, F? And let's play it out several times and figure out what that kind of data is. And there are probably, I'm going to say a really silly number here, but there probably would be 10 plus things differently that I would do or recommend doing in that lead up space next time, because the data is important, obviously, particularly for anybody who's not done a teams event before. You're putting down a prediction of what you might get. If I'm team Army A playing against Army B and I'm predicting, I can win maybe a 12-8. Okay, having played 10 games there helps obviously make that prediction more accurate, and then not having it flip around to an 8-12 or a 5-15 or something. But I think there was also a lot of not looking at what we could do internally in that game to what happens if the dice go super cold or super hot in whatever direction. How can you manage this? What's the difference that you might do in a team's environment perspective compared to a individual environment perspective or a solo? The most obvious is, this option has a 3% chance of going off, but if I don't do it, I lose. Well, in a singles environment, you do that nearly every single time because, like, well, what happens if you don't win? And particularly when tournaments are moving away more from battle points, and I know some people don't like me suggesting that battle points are not a great option for differentiating where people are in a tournament. But if we're moving away from battle points and it's more about your strength of schedule or the opponents that you faced, well, yeah, I'm going to take that 3% gamble in a singles event because otherwise, well, I'm getting a loss. While in a teams event, okay, that 3% gamble, that might make me lose 20-0. So if I keep playing it safe, can I at least get an 18-2? Because if those 2 points then can pull out, if 3 or 4 of our players are getting 2 extra points each, that's the difference between a loss and a draw or a draw and a win. And that was, I think, things that we didn't focus on a lot, that upon reflection, particularly recognizing, hey, Birdie's actually the only one in the playing team that's played in an 8-person teams event. That practical experience is massive. And so there's perhaps a lot of assumed knowledge or assumed understanding or experience there. And that's not saying that our players or team did a bad job there, but these are areas that maybe we could have improved upon as a group as a whole. And that rather than focusing maybe on so much data and practice in let's play the game out, but hey, how do we manipulate or make some of these things different?
That's really insightful, and it's thank you for that, Kirby. It's really interesting because obviously I think the first thing that every team thinks about is data. Like, can we just get a pairings matrix, and then can we at least make it accurate? Because obviously sometimes you get a pairings matrix, and in years past, like someone has, this is a yellow, like a very drawish even matchup, and then it quickly slides down, and it just doubles down and goes worse and worse and worse. And at the end of the event, it's all oranges and reds because they don't have the good data, or their self-belief is down, which obviously is horrible and sucks. But they it obviously sounds like maybe you had pretty good data, but maybe that player experience hindered results along the way. And when stuff goes bad, they didn't have that. It sounds bad. They didn't have the fortitude to come back, but maybe they just hadn't experienced it or had the experience fundamentally. So, yeah, it's cool to hear. So I guess I wanted to ask as well. So you had your 8 plays, you've sort of done your practice days and stuff like that. It comes around to list submission. So how did you guys sort of end up on lists? Did you obviously you had Greek Alex on AdMech, well, to spoil things? Was it basically choosing people who are very comfortable with their lists and factions and then skewing the list that way? Or what? How did you sort of, allocate a list to the player?
Sure. Before I answer that, I'll just walk back to your comment there, Sam, where I think how we manage ourselves in, say, for example, an individual tournament. Like if you lose round 1, for example, you know that it's probably unlikely that you'll be fighting on the top tables at the end of a tournament. And so that takes all the pressure off. So the rest of the game is just cool, easy breezy. You can just chill. While in a teams environment, particularly in 8-person teams, it's not just you that you're impacting, it's everybody else. So managing, when you lose a game, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be disappointed, particularly if you walked in going pretty confident. And that management of experience, I think, is one of the main differences that you just have to experience it and to know it. Like if we use a professional sports example, I know you're wearing the beautiful Mavs jersey at the moment, and we always talk about playoff experience. I know. Get the little Kirby tattoos as we talked about beforehand. They really are not what we're referencing, but we're going to roll with it. And sometimes it is a trial by fire, and that's not to say that is not a good thing or a negative on anybody that actually attended. And I can see Pete and Dale are continuing to bully each other in the chat. But Dale, I don't actually remember any team that had sexually intimidating pairing cards. They were all really just kind of not enthusiastic enough for me, really.
Yeah, so for audio listeners, so we're just going to save the question until later on, like during the rounds. But Mr. Daleman, the pairing guru for ACT, asked which team had the most sexually intimidating pairing cards. And look, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they probably weren't as good as the ones I've done in years past. But like, I mean, you got to make up for it.
Yeah, and I'm not going down the path that Dale would like me to.
That's okay. That's okay. So, yeah, obviously that playoff experience and obviously mentality. But so we'll shift back to lists. So, how did you sort of allocate lists to the players? Do they choose their own list, or was it designed specifically as part of the overall team comp?
Yeah, it's a bit of A and bit of B, and I think this is something that, reflecting back on, is a thing that I would do very differently, or shift how we approached it. From a broad perspective, there were certain people that were that we had locked in to armies quite quickly, or there might have only been one or two armies that we were choosing from and going back and forth on. There is always the looming data slate that happens just before ATC as well, and fingers crossed. In theory, we have a data slate coming out in 1 to 2 weeks, maybe, from what MetaWatch was saying the other day. And if that then occurs, maybe we're going to get June, September, December, March-ish as our kind of change dates, which would actually work really well with a lot of the year-end tournaments in January and stuff like that. So there was a lot of identifying, okay, we've got some players that are kind of set on armies, or we're got some flexibility, but it's one or two armies, and kind of trying to work backwards from there, particularly around what's our theoretical data matrix, and are there any glaring gaps? And if there are glaring gaps, do we just suck it up? Or is there a way that we can cover that gap without creating a gap somewhere else? And I think this is where reflecting and having a takeaway from a leadership position, I'm a player that likes to take, if I create my perfect matrix, it's just yellow. It's just 10s everywhere. That's my perfect theory of a list and perfect balance in a game, because then it all comes down to player skill. And that to me is where I feel the most comfortable and able to create the biggest impact. But I think in particularly the larger teams events, you need more and more skew. So if we looked at our matrix, there's a lot of 8 to 12s ranges there, and not a lot of 5s or 15s. Well, I'm going to use ACT, since Dale's sitting there in the chat, and some of their list, like Ewurt's, for example, which was very much, I actually don't know if there are any super red matchups for it. The Custodes did exist at the time, which was a much, much worse matchup for Wolf Jail at the time. But it was an army with a lot of greens, a couple of reds, that was out to hunt things. And I think having more skewy results like that ends up making your matrix a lot easier to work with. While we only ended up having a couple of lists like that, while I think other teams ended up with 4 or 5 or 6, which is why our results were always really, really close to draws. And then if we go back to previous comment around turning a 20-0 to an 18-2, that starts to add up in that space. While if we're having people that are smacking 20-0s out, then it's a little bit less variance there anyway.
Yeah, sure. So I get that makes sense. So obviously, I guess part of the list design philosophy was sort of trying to keep it even, and then obviously you can use player skill to leverage that and make them better results. Because New South Wales does have some very, very good players who can leverage those results. How did you sort of? I guess the fundamental question. So obviously, Jordan McGregor playing a bunch of sisters. Sisters were good enough. You just gave him sisters, essentially. I guess is that sort of the philosophy you sort of used? And like for the newer players, like so obviously you had Arian, as I understand, and you had Princey. So did you just sort of give them the armies they were very used to, or did you try and like, I guess, give them armies that maybe filled something in the data analysis as a whole?
Yeah. ultimately, our choices were the more familiar you are with something, the more comfortable you are with it. And so Arian and Princey, as examples brought up there, both had a couple of armies that they were looking at. I think it was Hypercrypt Necrons and Marines for Arian, and Custodes Chaos Knights for Princey. And the more comfortable you are on the army, the easier the results are. Like we're talking about a 20-0 trying to make it to an 18-2. If you know your army inside and out, it's a lot easier to get that 18-2 than like flipping through a codex and go, oh, what emergency stratagems do I have in this moment, or something like that. We've all had that. So I'm sure I've got a stratagem that I could use here, maybe in theory. And so I think it was as we sort of got people locked in and their lists kind of locked in, that then created more understanding for other people in terms of their variants and in terms of their changes. And I think setting that a lot earlier in the time frame and probably making a little bit more skew in that phase would have been overall more helpful. But I think in terms of people being able to pick their armies or pick how they're playing it, that's probably the route that we were going down this last year.
That's fair. That's very fair. So, more obviously gave people a choice and like gave them some freedom, and you built the matrices how you did, and then we head into the event. So obviously you guys were about the pot of 6, and so they had a very unique system, I guess, ANZ TCE. So you would have to prepare when you revealed you were in the pot of 6. Did you and I guess lists were revealed. What was the process for you guys behind the scenes?
So when the pods were revealed, everybody's first day matchups were also revealed. So we knew who we were playing round 1. So I think it was New Zealand North, New Zealand South, and Vic Mercs. So from pod 1, it was only needing to reveal or go through those first 3 groups of lists. And then I think this was one area that we came back to bite us in the butt, because we were pretty confident that we would get out of the pot of 6 into day 2. And so we were then looking at who did we think would also be in pod 2. And that was particularly, or not pod 2, but the
top of bracket. Because basically, because like for people who are unaware, basically at the end of day 1, I think if you're in the top 2 positions, essentially, you would get promoted to day 2, where you'll only play, I guess, the top 3 other teams, essentially. So you can only play them, and I guess, as you said, you sort of expected going and had that confidence that you would be at that upper echelon.
Yeah. So that meant that our prep was really only for 6 teams, the 3 that we were playing day 1, and then with who we thought the other teams would be in the upper pod day 2, which meant there was a little bit more prep work that we were needing to do on the night of day 1, because we did obviously not get into the upper pod cut. But our prep was, once particularly lists were revealed, we actually had a group day that weekend. Lists were revealed 7 days before the event, so we didn't have a whole lot of time. But particularly then putting down some of those specific lists that we expected to come against and do some practice into. And so having the list specifically was quite helpful in being able to do more specific practice there.
Very fair. And so I guess at the event, so I guess recapping day 1, so I played New Zealand North round 1. So how did that go? Was that a draw, or was it a draw?
Right? It was a draw, yeah. So I think we went draw, loss, win, draw, win, win from memory.
Yeah, it sounds about right. But so what happened? So obviously round 2 you played New Zealand South, and as you said, you were confident going in, you would probably get promoted, and New Zealand South didn't perform the best last year, but obviously upset is it fair to say they upset you guys and like they got the win in that round? Or was it always something going to be a challenging round from your perspective?
I think I made a face with the upset, because I think in terms of what our experience was and how we performed across the weekend, 3 wins, 2 draws, and a loss is probably a pretty accurate reflection. No comments around where that changes our location or anything like that. So I think going into New Zealand South, we were probably already quite deflated as a group, getting a draw against New Zealand North, because one, it was the low end of a draw as well. So if we had, I think, 2 points less, that would have been a loss. So it wasn't a high draw. That skews the math quite a lot in terms of now, if anybody watches like World Cup soccer or any of those World Cup stuff, a single loss or a single draw throws into things quite a whack of who actually comes out of the pods. So I think as a group, we're a little bit deflated. And again, I think this is reflecting where our confidence was going into that pot of 6, as we felt like we would be coming out of it pretty easily. And then there was, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, Birdie, but some of our expected medium to decent results got flipped on their heads, which happens in this game. That's okay. And then I think, again, if we reflect back on what we talked about with our lists and army styles maybe not being as skewy as is appropriate in that 8-person teams format, that then meant when one of our normally big winners was flipped on its head, that we didn't have a lot of recovery space available for it. So while I might make a face of, was it an upset? I don't know. Based upon how we did overall the tournament, I think we recovered really well. But it was definitely a surprise at the time, I think. And that was a pretty big hit on morale, I think, for everybody.
Sure. So then obviously, then obviously round 3, you play into Merc. So what do you guys have to do heading between round 2 and 3? Like, you got the loss, you lost by two differential points, which is not a lot. So what was, like, I guess, your recovery there? Like, what did you have to do between rounds 2 and 3 to make sure, I guess it sounds bad, but snowball and like you go into round 3? Because I'm sure, like, look, you felt very confident that obviously it's the mercenary team. So what did you have to do to ensure that you didn't lose round 3?
Yeah. I don't even think losing round 3 or whatever the result for round 3, I think at that point was neither here nor there. I think the more important part was having confidence and belief in ourselves and making sure that even if we lost, if we go 0 wins day 1, okay. But making sure that we're having a good time and an enjoyable time. Losing obviously sucks, but are we taking anything away from it? And I think even between round 1 and round 2, there was quite a lot of cheerleading and trying to lift the squad up. And this is, I guess, we're having quite a few hands on deck, myself as the non-playing captain, Tim, Ben, and Cooper as captains and coaches, being able to keep the morale up and keep people buoyant and going in. Obviously, if we're feeling pretty crap, we're probably going to go in and lose a game. And so trying to really make sure that morale in that psychology space was as positive as possible to go into it.
And I guess that mindset and psychology space after day 1, so you got the win, or a narrow win into Mercs. So look, obviously that's probably still doesn't shakes the confidence maybe a little bit for some people. But what did you have to do? So like night 1, you're not going to be in the top pod. Like expectations are lower than maybe you went in with. So what did you guys do from Team New South Wales? So you're playing maybe a completely separate set of teams that you expected to play against. Maybe some, look, obviously your predictions may have had the valiant ACT in the top pod. I don't know. Maybe you did. Maybe you did it. So, but like, how did you sort of? You did. Cheeky did. Of course, right? Of course, absolutely.
We did,
yeah. So, but what did you have to do? So that night 1, what did you guys do? Did you have to like start a fresh matrix for the remaining teams, or did you sort of have a pre-filled matrix already?
So we had a pre-filled matrix already, but obviously more specific information, particularly based upon the missions. We asked everybody to do. Some of it was done on the day, because also we don't, like, after a pretty disappointing day 1 1-on-1, not wanting everybody to focus on Warhammer. So the main thing was really, let's go out, have a nice time. I think us and Tasmania were the only teams that didn't stay and have food as a group. With everybody else at the venue, I think we finished at, I'm going to say either 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. I can't remember, but it was pretty late. We wanted to just go out, have a little bit of a team dinner, and then get to bed. And so I think just getting some time away from Warhammer. We debriefed a lot of games throughout the day or that evening anyway. But getting a little bit space from it, just chilling out, having a good time. Like, hey, we're not, even if we were in Sydney, but we're not in Sydney where we all live, or we're not in New South Wales where we all live. I think a couple of boys live a bit north. Being able to just chill out, have a good time, recoup, and prep for the next day. More importantly than any data collection would have been a good night's sleep. And I know that's very ironic coming from me, but focusing on that self-care was a really big component of that.
That's more than fair, and like I think after something like that, you just need to regroup, and then and I guess part of that selection process has sort of worked out well. Obviously, having a group of players who like each other, who get along well, and be able to regroup and stuff, and then hit day 2 hard. And in day 2, round 1, you faced an old enemy in the ACT. So what was it like heading? Old enemy?
Yes. There are friends. What are you talking about?
That's fair. That's fair. So, what was it like heading into ACT? I'll focus a bit on this round, obviously, because I'm very biased, having been from the ACT. Well, obviously, you had the best number of ACT in the past, but we'd always come close. And then, I guess, how did this sort of round play out from your eyes?
So we, as we said before, we'd done some scrims against ACT leading up to it. So, and we quite often, a lot of the New South Wales people drive down to some of the Canberra tournaments, and we see a lot of them come up to some of our bigger tournaments up in New South Wales as well. We had Capital Clash 2 weeks ago, I think, and I feel like half the ACT, maybe 3/4 of the ACT team was there, and we had probably quite a large contingent. Maybe about half of our team was there as well. So we know each other really well, is what I'm saying there. And while there was some really inappropriate pairing cards that ACT and Dale were using, it was a really easy pairing process. Lovely games all around. Were there some potential surprises in game? Yep. But I think as well we had some pretty interesting swings sometimes. Like we don't want to throw Cody under the bus, but I think he was very surprised to get absolutely steamrolled by Princey there. And then we also had one flip around where we had Rowan and Brody in the Tyranids Mirror flip around against us as well. So it ended up in I don't remember exactly what the draw was, but I feel like it was pretty in the middle.
Yeah, so New South Wales won drew 84 to 76. So obviously on the winning side of the draw and very close to a win there. But New South Wales, ACT finally, I guess, quote unquote, got their number and a draw per se. So I like to think the lads were pretty happy getting that result. As a whole, something they've been chasing for a long time, and we've come close but never got there. And look, we'll be hot on the heels, I'm sure, getting that first ever natural win in NZTC eventually. I'm sure it's not too far away, but we'll see what happens. You guys may come.
The lads have a really good group, and they're obviously working really well together. So I'm very keen to see what they keep doing, and particularly once Europe is not on Wolf Jail anymore, so I can stop having nightmares. That would be great.
Just the howling at the moon. You just hear like some background sounds, and you have some PTSD moments, I'm sure.
Some of our scrim days, and also on the day of the tournament, 3 of us have now been absolutely rolled over by Ura and his very well played Wolf Jail. So I'm looking forward to the nurse that you're going to receive, Ura, and keen to see what you're going to play next.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's many complaints sent forward to GW because of you, but inundated.
I just polite request for some small tweaks, not for it to get cheaper, which I think Ura was very excited about on the weekend of ANZ TC, because the jump assault intercessors went down in points. So his list that he was playing was actually cheaper afterwards. I don't think he was able to get anything with those points, but it's the principle, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just it's a humble brag saying, "Look, I'm not even at 2,000 points. Look at me. I'm still beating your ass." So that's amazing. And then obviously you ended the day very well. So you played in Tasmania, got a relatively comfortable win, and then you beat the new kids on the block, Northern Territory. You bullies, absolute bullies. But it was good on them. And
if Chris O'Neill wasn't involved with that, we would have not done that. But because Chris was around, we really had to make sure that we let Chris know who's boss.
That's more than fair and reasonable, and he deserves it. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I was to say, you didn't have the brotherly pairing, did you? I didn't bother to check if you had the
Chris
Peter
wasn't
versus Chris
playing.
O'Neill pairing. Oh,
Yeah,
okay, fair
Chris
enough.
wasn't playing,
Fair
but
enough.
we've got the better O'Neill now anyway, so it's all good.
You always did, right? You always had the superior O'Neill.
I'm not going to wade into the middle of their
That's a debate of many family discussions, I'm sure.
yes,
So,
I'm sure.
so I guess, and we've sort of talked about throughout this podcast, sort of the reflections on the event. But so ended day 2. What was, I guess, the main? And you ended, I think, it was 6 overall. Obviously, noting like the top 4 was seed or 5th. Sorry, apologies, 5th overall. So I guess. What was the reflections overall as a team? Like, how did you, like, at the end of day 2, what was the feelings in the room like?
I think finishing a day with 2 wins and a draw, obviously a lot better than 1-1-1. And being top of the not cut off pod, it's a small victory. It's a great reflection, I think, on our ability to recover. No shade to our the NT boys. They have obviously a much smaller scene, and I think it's just absolutely impressive that they were able to get a team down to ANZ TC at all. But the Tassie and ACT groups obviously very competitive, and a lot of good players in those groups. So being able to pull out some solid spaces there where, while it was a draw against ACT, it was a winning draw compared to a lot of our others, which were much more closer to a loss. And then a solid victory against Taz. Morale, obviously, a lot more positive there. And I think it was also a lot of very quick reflections on what we could be doing differently for ANZ TC. I'd obviously already had some thoughts and thinking processes from our day 1, and starting to have chats about what we would do differently for next year. So while I think we were very disappointed to not be in the top pod and to not podium, I think it was a great learning experience and a really good almost reset space for New South Wales, where while we didn't have players like Chris Wright, who are normally, he's amazing in every space of Warhammer, taking a little bit of break, which is fair, but getting some newer faces in there and some experience that they might not have had without that. And then I think we've got a really good foundation. Particularly Greg's got some great ideas around the New South Wales community in general. And hopefully that springboards us to where we were aiming for this year, which was to get that elusive victory for New South Wales, but even as a first step, getting back into the podium and working our way towards that.
Yeah, so working towards a podium. So I guess what are the big key things that New South Wales are going to be focusing on so that they're standing on the podium and hopefully clinching the illustrious ANZ trophy?
Was that a question? Sorry, Sam.
Yes. What's the process like? What from here?
I missed the word what. I was like,
that's okay. I was going to ask. So obviously you've sort of rehashed a couple of the lessons learned throughout this podcast, but I guess summing everything up, what are the big things that yourself and Greg moving forward are hoping that New South Wales will do between now and next year's ANZ TC that will put you on the podium and ideally holding the ANZ trophy?
Yeah. So the main thing, and I'll look at my Freudian slip before where I said we're all from Sydney. And I know not everybody in the team of 8 is from Sydney. But making Team New South Wales something that's a lot more inclusive, that New South Wales is cheering on and excited to send. Like I know the majority of us in Australia, when the Olympics are on, we're all cheering for every single Australian in most of the sports, where there's a lot of national pride, I think, in spaces like that. Same with the World Cup, with soccer, or anything along those lines. And so I think our goal for this next year, with what we found with the 16 and 8, is while we want more and more people to be involved, and even after like the 8's been chosen, what we tend to see is a sharp drop off in participation from some people. which is very understandable. If you've not made the next step of the team, like the amount of energy and effort that you're going to want to put in is going to be lower. And what we're trying to do here is not have that happen. So even if you might not get into the playing 8 this year, you've seen it still being involved in the process, still involved in practice days or community days. And then that's giving a broader access to people like Greg or whoever the captain might be to see what you're doing and how you're doing it for next year. Like I know in a more workspace, we're often encouraged to apply for jobs that you might not have the experience for it, but registering your interest internally that you'd like to go for this means that other opportunities might present themselves or open up for you. And I think that's a really big part of what we're trying to do here. So the main thing around that is we've opened the Team New South Wales Discord. If you want an invite, message myself or Greg and we'll give you an invite into the Discord, and that's going to be open all the time now. It's not going to be a little segregated experience that gets reset every year. It's just going to be a regular space where if you're interested in getting on Team New South Wales, even if it's not this year, even if it's, hey, I just started 40K today and I'm random listening to these two people on this podcast about things that I do not understand, but I want to be a part of this in the future, let us know. Sign up. We want you there. Because I'm going to quote Birdie here with his little saying, but a tide raises or rises all ships. So if we're increasing the overall skill and experience and player community pool in New South Wales, that's going to help all of us. The more people that are challenging you in games from a competitive standpoint, well, the more we're all going to get really good. Reflecting on my last tournament at Capital Clash, for example, I played Cody, Rowan, Ben Tinker, Jordan McGregor, and Ewart. And all 5 of those opponents were some way involved with ANZ TC this year. And that's the type of tournament I want to have every single time. Maybe not Wolf Jail, though, but other than that, 5 games against really good opponents who knows what they're doing. And if you lose the game, okay, you've lost against a good player. And if that's the more common experience, that would be great. And that's, I think, what would really help them propel us further up the podium to ultimately winning, is having that really good base level experience or competitiveness from everyone. And the more, I think, inclusive that we can make the team feel, the more people are going to want to be involved, and then a tide rises all ships.
Amazing words. You should be a motivational speaker, Kirby. Like that's inspirational.
That's
Birdie.
That's Birdie.
No, I thought that was a really good synopsis and like summary. I think anyone can take inspiration from that, not just people who are part of New South Wales or want to be part of Team New South Wales. Like there's some really good advice there, and I can 100% say that for or anyone around people who show interest and are dedicated and just want to be involved, like it goes a long way. So look, obviously, like not trying to single someone out, but like Tim, for example, someone who did all the data analysis and all the back-end coach work, like look, that goes a long way, and I'm sure he's getting looked at a lot closer, plus some gaming results, and look, you never know what's going to happen there. So amazing stuff. So I guess you alluded to there before, you started the process again now. So, and I understand that applications are open now for Team New South Wales. So A, what does that look like? And then B, what is it for? So is it just for people who want to play, or is it for only captains at this, or who wants to be the captain at this stage?
So in terms of applications, if you are on that Discord, you've applied. I don't think we're going to have a formal, here are some questions that we're going to ask of you this time around. We might later, but effectively, like our team of 16 last year was kind of like, all right, this is the group that we're working with to pick our 8 from. That's what we're doing right now, but with whoever's in the Discord. So I don't know how many we've got in the Discord. What's 19 plus 24?
Oh my gosh, 43.
Yeah, so we've got 43 in the Discord at the moment. So that's the group that we're working from, and more people will jump in, obviously, as the year goes on. What that allows, or what we're hoping to build from there, is New South Wales Community Days. Even just things like some of the people in that Discord have been playing games on TTS, and people are jumping in and watching it. Or when all the rules were released for Sisters and Gene Stealers, everybody's talking about it. What's Pariah Nexus going to do? And so more and more conversation and communication around things like that is obviously really great, and it's going to help everybody. And then the people in the leadership positions, Greg mostly at the moment, is able to look at that and then go, okay, well, I can see this person's putting in a lot of effort, or I can see this person from now, or let's say March to 6 months ago, has made A, B, and C changes, which is what we're all about. Like, even if we go back to some of the conduct things, self-reflection is hard. It's being introspective and going, oh, I did, okay, that makes me a bit uncomfortable. I need to make some changes potentially here. And I'm a big person of not holding your past over you if you've demonstrated that you've been able to make some changes and do some spaces like that. And I think that's where this Discord and the applications there will be really great. In terms of the applications that have been put out, Greg's posted for the captain position. So that position is going out now, so that we've got our leadership group in early. And then that means that our weekly calls for last year were amazing, but I think there was also a bit of burnout after 5-6 months of those weekly calls where it was just, guys, I've got a running joke here. I've got to go to basketball because we did our group calls always on the day that I had basketball. But I think for some people there was a bit of burnout after 5+ months of that. So this way, then it's going to be a bit more spread out and see what we can get from it. And I think coach applications will be going up later, but I don't know exactly when. And I think Greg's got a little bit of a different way that we're going to then be selecting the group of 8, but that's going to be way further next year, a lot closer to ANZ TC, to try to keep the engagement up as much as possible.
Very cool and very exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. So, Kirby, are you going to be putting your hand up for non-playing captain again, or could we maybe see you as part of the playing 8, hopefully?
Look, I am going to put my hand up again.
Yep.
Natural inclination is to not. I would much rather play. And I definitely felt that itch all of ANZ TC weekend. At the same time, I think in my initial application last year, I mentioned that I felt that going from podium to first in a year was probably a little unrealistic, but we still had it as a pipe dream. But I think particularly given that we've made quite a lot of changes to how the process is going, and particularly even some self-reflections of my own experience, what we learned, and if I could click my fingers and say, we're going to redo the entire process leading up to ANZ TC, what would you do differently? So many different things. And I think that's a lot easier to implement having done it 1 year and then going back to back with that. At the same time, I think there's going to be some really amazing applicants as well. And if somebody else gets captaincy, we'll be very happy to pass all that information on to them and see how they do it. And then I'll obviously stick my hand up to try and get into the playing 8 as well, and see if we can get that pink Kirby mascot running around again.
Hell yeah, everyone wants to see it, either as a non-playing captain version or on the tabletop, just smashing people. So, look, I'm sure you maybe very similar to the Fallout TV show, where when things are glum, vote 31. I'm sure you can make your own political TV slogan. So, but we'll work on that. We'll work on the political campaign later on. So, this has been amazing, Kirby. Thank you so much for this chat. So, before I guess wrap things up, did you have any final shout outs or plugs you would like to make?
Look, shout out to everybody on the team, both the 16 and the 8 and all the support staff. I'm not going to name all of you because it will take 2 minutes, and then I will forget one person because I don't have a list in front of me, and then it will be a controversy and political nightmare. But you all know who you are. You all did a really fantastic job, and I really appreciate everybody's input this past year. While it was disappointing for us to end up in 5th, I think we absolutely smashed it out of the park. Team New South Wales had no conduct issues or sportsmanship reports at all over the weekend, and that is amazing. That is one of the goals that we went down for, and we smashed that one out of the park. And now hopefully with some of our new options or new ideas, we can bring that up to use the really good player skill that I think New South Wales has, and make it a team that we're all supporting and getting behind, that whoever gets sent and whenever they get sent, we are all rooting for and hope they smash it.
What a kind gentleman. What a nice guy. And I think it's amazing to recap on that. And good shout out to all the New South Wales lads. Oh, yeah.
New South Wales people. Yeah.
People. There we go. Except in State of Origin, go Queensland. But I digress. But yeah, so this has been an amazing chat, Kirby. Thank you so much. But before you wrap things up, obviously you got some final plugs and shout outs to make. So because first and foremost, unfortunately, a bit of a very down note. So in the Tasmanian community, they had a recent, unfortunately, Aidan Lyle, an absolute legend of a human being, unfortunately passed away recently. And so the Thylacine Tabletop Gaming Group, who are the main group in Tasmania, are doing a fundraiser in memoriam for him. And so the funds for the event will go towards his family. So if anyone's keen on purchasing some tickets, so there's a casual RTT going on there for him in his honor at the end of July. I highly recommend anyone attend, and also any donations will be greatly appreciated, and all funds will go towards a charitable purposes. So for anyone involved and anyone who got to know Aidan, it'd be great to see some support for he and his family. Then also with Down on 40K, so obviously patreon.com. So look, the way we fund this podcast and we help support events is via Patreon. So for people who are keen in supporting myself and other content creators on this network, I can, for as little as $5 a month, do it here, but also get early access to the Down Under 40K events, which help run the circuit. Get some exclusive cheap tickets or some discounted tickets, and then get early access for those Beresfield and the Sydney RTTs, which sell out very, very quickly. So highly encourage anyone to be involved and support the network that supports and the circuit that supports you. Then also the official terrain sponsor of the Down to the 40K circuit is Tip Top Terrain. So they have some amazing MDF cut terrain. I've got the GW set myself, and it's amazing. It goes together very well. And the guy behind it is making some amazing widgets and stuff like that along the way. Like there's 9-inch deep strike markers and various measuring gadgets and gauges. So definitely check them out. And a very big thank you to Tip Top Terrain for sponsoring the circuit. Second last but not least is emperor.cc. So if you are after any hobby supplies or anything like that, check out Emperor, where they have various GW stuff up to 20% off and various other hobby supplies when you can't get them. It's from your LGS or your friendly local gaming store. And then last but not least, D6 Designs AU. Were there gentlemen that did your dice for this year, D6 Designs, or don't put in a spot?
No. Timothy Wallace was the one that organized that. Timothy, that sounds very formal. I don't want to say yes, just in case.
Just in case, that's all right. Well, the superior territory in ACT went through them, and they've got some beautiful ACT 40K dice, and they've always gone through them, and it's always amazing looking dice. It's their Etsy store, so D6 Designs AU. And if you use code DU40KL, we'll get 10% off. And I highly recommend them. They're my go-to dice for sure. So it's amazing. And they roll lots of sixes. So you don't even have to flush them down the toilet to prove it out. So
tell Greg if they roll lots of sixes, he thinks he got the bad batch.
Oh, well, there we go. You gotta work it out. So, when you feed your supply, you get some good stuff. So, fantastic.
Yeah, right spots.
There you go. Absolutely. So, thank you very much, Kirby, and thank you everyone for listening and joining in the conversation. We look forward to seeing how you guys progress. And look, I'm sure you'll be clinching some medals hopefully next year, and be on the podium doing that meme of like shaking it all and like celebrating like absolute insanity.
Do it,
right? Absolutely, do a shoe and everything, and maybe eating some olives as well in celebration, because you got
Yes,
some fucking weird
that's
obsession
Greg.
with olives.
Greg's there. We don't. Greg does not
Very
like
good.
olives, so we don't want him to have to suffer through that.
But suffering for sacrifice. And on that last middle sisters note, there we go. See, got one innuendo in there. That's the show. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a